Good evening. The November 21st special meeting of the Evanston City Council will come to order. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Harris. Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Nusma. Councilmember, Mayor Biss.
Here.
Councilmember Burns.
Here.
Councilmember Suffredin. Councilmember Ravel. Here. Councilmember Reed.
Here.
Councilmember Hadakaris. I see that he is on Zoom. Councilmember Hadakaris, you're on mute. Seems to be having technical issues. Councilmember Kelly.
We have a quorum present and are prepared to do our work. The first item on this evening's agenda is public comment.
Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Nusma.
Here.
Hey, Jonathan, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll want to switch off of YouTube.
Councilmember, Mayor Biss.
Here.
Councilmember Burns.
Here.
Councilmember Suffredin. Councilmember Ravel. Here. I see
That
that
brings
he
us-
is on Zoom. Councilmember Hadakaris, you're on mute.
Here.
All right, so just want to make sure that anyone who is watching on Zoom has their microphone muted. Otherwise, we'll be in an infinite loop, taking us ever further into the past. Not what we want this evening. We now move on to public comment. There are I think about 12 speakers signed up tonight, so everyone will be given the full 3 minutes. We begin, as always, with those who signed up in person to speak in person, starting with Jack Mortel, who will be followed by Dave Ellis and then Ray Friedman.
Good evening. Kind of cozy tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to address the council this evening. I'd like to address property tax relief in a big way. The main point I want to make is it is not required to completely use or raise the total of real estate taxes to meet the city's pension obligations. There are other options that have been underutilized for years. The Illinois Personal Property Tax Replacement, commonly referred to as PPRT, is one really good example. In accordance to the Illinois Municipal League, we all know friendly people there, PPRT, this their document, PPRT document, their words, not mine. PPRT was designed to provide a revenue source for local governments to meet pension obligations, and pay outstanding debt. There's plenty of outstanding debt with the pension too. And then otherwise, that's a big otherwise. I read it as once those things are taken care of, then you can look at other ways to spend it. Was an unrestricted source of funding for local government's operation and services. This stream from the state to our city came into effect 43 years ago, back in 1979. I reviewed all the available previous budgets reaching back to 2002 on the city's budget webpage. And I pulled out the one page for PPRT. I have them all here. They're highlighted. They're your numbers. They're real. You can see the amount of PPRT revenue that was budgeted, the amount of PPRT revenue that was actually received. There's a big difference. And where the staff allocated and previous councils approved the PPRT revenue for the past 20 years. This is not a one-off. This isn't like here and there. This is a pattern. I reviewed all the approximately, in that review, approximately 17.1 million PPRT revenue was slightly over this, was budgeted over this 20-year period. However, $31.5 million in PPRT revenue came to this city. Was actually received, and that results in a $14.3 million PPRT revenue surplus. Again, not my numbers, your numbers. They're on the website. If you want, I can scan and send them to everybody. They're real. According to this past 20 years, at various times, $6 million of that PPRT revenue went for recreation.
15 seconds.
500,000 went to the library. 4.2 million went for pension. That's it. 4.2 million. That's a paltry 13.44% of the 31.5 million PRTP revenue received in these past 20 years went for pensions.
Time.
Dave, can I have your time?
Yeah, I cede my time to Mr. Mortel.
The next speaker is Dave Ellis, who in the person of Jack Mortel.
Thank you. So this remainder, I don't want to skip over this too fast. This remainder appears to go back to the city's general fund, but there's absolutely no visibility in the budgets on the city's website, in these budgets, where the $14.3 million surplus PPRT revenue went, and especially what this $14.3 million surplus revenue was used for in these last 20 years. Imagine if for 20 years, between now and 2002, the city staff had budgeted 100% of the PPRT revenue. That was to meet pension obligations. Where would we be right now? What about between 79 and 2002? Where'd that money go? I wouldn't be standing here if that was the case. It's a huge number. We wouldn't have this huge shortfall. The pension shortfall we're looking at and the resulting enormous liability that the taxpayers are now forced to shoulder is very real. It was created by the staff's maneuvering and then approved by previous councils. Please be the council that has the will to correct this pension missteps from the past. Please fund the pensions 100% starting in 2023 without further burdening the taxpayers by raising taxes to do it. There are other ways. The funds to this are hidden in the reserves. Those funds have always been there. The staff knows this, I know this, and I believe the balance of people in this room here know it. Yes, Mr. Mayor and council members, it's time to bring the promise of real long-term real estate relief to Evanston's homeowners and businesses. Fund the pensions at 100% without raising taxes. You can do it. It's a truly prudent thing to do. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ray Friedman, who will be followed by Mary Rosinski and then Tricia Connolly.
Good evening, everyone. First, thanks to Jack Mortel. That was amazing. Facts and figures, it's amazing. Next, I want to say welcome back to Melissa Wynn. I hope you're feeling better. Good to see you back. Welcome to another exciting edition of Public Comment, where residents get to speak but rarely, if ever, get a response. I don't know why you would be offended by any public comments after residents are trying to get answers or feedback from their public comments and just being ignored. I would guess that you would be very frustrated also. I don't understand why you keep on ignoring the purpose and intent of public comment. You know, being to foster a dialogue. Why is that so difficult? I asked at last council meeting the difference between public comment and public hearing, which was required by law. We did not finish our public hearing, even after several council members agreed to do so. And yet tonight you are proposing to pass the new city budget with no further discussion with residents, or did you plan to finish the budget hearing tonight? This is extremely frustrating, disheartening, disingenuous, and really lacking the care and consideration of your residents. Please do not pass the budget tonight until the residents have had a chance to discuss it with all of you. Thank you. Ray Friedman, 2nd Ward.
For an answer to your question, the budget won't be passed tonight.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mary Rosinski, who will be followed by Tricia Connolly and then Darlene Cannon.
Hi, Mary Rosinski, 7th Ward. Nice to see you all. I, too, am here to ask you to please, for our future generations and to really get some traction with getting ahead of our payments, 100% fund the pensions. Because we are just kicking this ball down, and it's like a bad credit card that never gets paid off. It's got to happen, and there is so much surplus, and we haven't talked about the difference between the reserves and the surplus, although many residents have come up and asked questions and looked at the budget. And over the last couple of years, I've noticed that there used to be a tally that said fund balance, fund this. Right now, it just says projected balance, projected. We don't know what we're talking about when it comes to the actual numbers that are here. The only people who know are some staff numbers, and when I've asked, I have not gotten any answers. And I read the budget memos, and I see this and this, and I know some of you are really trying to get this right, but this is not a transparent budget. This really needs attention by every single one of you guys who are up here trying to, get transparency, spend our money wisely. If we pay the pensions now, it's our future generations that are going to have more money to take care of our city, our infrastructure. We are going to have extra money. But I do want to know what the surplus is versus the reserves, because I know we have 16% reserves. But I know we do have also this $14 million. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to spend last year $11 million, pass an $11 million expenditure for 2021 that we hadn't budgeted for. So staff clearly knew that they could spend that money and that money would be covered, but residents didn't. I don't think you all knew either. So you all need to be asking the people questions, backup documentation. And example and point is the animal shelter. I want an animal shelter. I think that a proposal that says $6 million for an animal shelter, when $2 million of that is contingencies, is crap. There's nothing else about it. You don't go building a house for they say $2.8 million to build it with $2 million in contingency. That's just crazy. You guys, you wouldn't do it in your own house. Don't expect to do it in the House of Evanston. Ask these people for numbers. And please, on every project, just be as critical with the public dollar as you would be with your own dollar. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Tricia Connolly, who will be followed by Darlene Cannon and then Dorian Price.
Good evening, Tricia Conley, 2nd Ward. Tonight I'd like to ask all of you to please fund the police and fire pension with the existing funds we have in our budget. I'm requesting that all of you push back against the idea that to do what is necessary, we have to bond out next year. If a storm is predicted, people prepare. The warning signals are coming to us daily that we are looking at a recession next year. And it is likely not going to be, quote, a soft landing. The cycles of capitalism have worked like this for many decades. This is not an outrageous claim. Show people in Evanston that you do not want them teetering to stay housed by adding the additional burden of a property tax increase that will likely have an impact on our most vulnerable, whether they rent or own a house. We've already received the word that District 202 and 65 plan each an additional 5% increase this next year in property taxes. The City of Evanston Finance Department has not been forthcoming on our current surplus or projections by year end. Truth in taxation hearings are not such when you haven't shared the whole truth. How do we make a plan to support Evanstonians when there is not full disclosure on our finances? This is why I call it financial infidelity. It seems like maybe there's some special things somebody, I don't know, staff, you all, want to spend the money on, like what happened with the $31 million surplus at the end of last year. We elected all of you to be our leaders. This includes being our financial stewards. This responsibility involves ensuring the city's financial status is transparent, and when it's not, demand it. This has not been the case with bonds, the police and fire pension, or with current and accumulated surpluses. I hope that tonight we can see what it looks like when our electeds show us fiscal responsibility by paying up on the police and fire pension without placing another financial burden on our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Darlene Cannon, who will be followed by Dorian Price.
Good evening, Darlene Cannon, Second Ward. My question is about the budget, too. I'd like to know how much the reserve is and how much do we have in surplus. And I'd like to know why it seems that, from my perspective, that none of you are asking questions about the backup data on cost of projects. And like everyone said before, we want the police and fire pensions funded at 100%. We need to stop the financial hemorrhaging caused by creating a greater debt balance each year. And I'd like to hear about what is the payment difference between paying 100% versus 90%. In regards to the Black employees report, please understand that Black employees and Black folks are exhausted. Over the past few years, our cognitive, emotional, and physical resources have been disproportionately depleted due to the pandemic and structural racism. Data shows that this type of ongoing experience creates psychological and racial fatigue and exhaustion. I look forward to hearing about the action plan for the Black employees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Dorian Price, after whom we'll go to our online commenters. We'll move on to the online commenters in that case, beginning with Dolores Holmes, who will be followed by Anthony Homa and then Mike Vasilko. Ms. Holmes? Ms. Holmes, are you able to hear us and unmute? If we're having some technical issues, we'll move back to her. The next speaker then is Anthony Homa, who's followed by Mike Vasilko, and then Chip Rateliff. It looked like Ms. Holmes is able to unmute. Ms. Holmes, are you ready? All right, in that case, the next speaker is Mike Vasilko, who will be followed by Chip Rateliff.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Thank you. So I've got 4 comments. I'll be brief. Fund the pensions fully. That seems to be a no-brainer, and everyone seems to understand that. The second item, City Manager Stowe, is an honest person. I'm convinced that City Manager Stowe will resolve the recently reported Black employee complaints report to everyone's satisfaction. This is a problem that Luke inherited. He inherited these circumstances from previous managers and previous councils. He deserves the time to properly investigate and to resolve the problems. Please give him the time. Third, I had suggested in an email to everyone that the council set aside $500,000 or $600,000 for 2023 discussions regarding council member living wage salaries. I just want to recommend again that you set that money aside and have that discussion next year. Lastly, and I guess I have to apologize for not articulating this, although I've spoken about it many times on and offline at council meetings, and that is this household climate action plan that I've been advocating for. Tonight, at this late date, I can only ask that the council set aside some of money, maybe $2 million, which is far below what I was previously recommending, dedicated to beginning the conversation in 2023 for a household climate action plan. The current CARP plan does not include and does not provide any incentive for Evanston's 30,000 households. They too need to reduce or eliminate the use of fossil fuels. The plan I've been advocating for focuses on the 30,000 households and ways that people in those households can pay to make it possible for them to consider climate action. The plan is similar to the latest Skokie sustainability document that I circulated today, Appendix A, that references revolving loan funds and a green bank or some version of the two for use by Evanston households. The plan also envisions taking money from an imposed carbon tax to, in part, fund the proposed household climate action.
15
I think
seconds.
of this in terms of climate, of carrots and sticks. The average person will not spend what is necessary to eliminate fossil fuel consumption. It's just the human nature. Households that will need full funding are the low-income households.
Time.
These two will need to have funding for their use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Chip Ratliff, after whom we'll go back to those who were not able to speak when called on earlier. Mr. Ratliff?
Hi, hello. I'm sorry. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here for the city board of the city board. My name is Chip Ratliff. I am the president of Shorefront. Shorefront, just for those of you who don't know, Shorefront is a Black history organization based here in Evanston. Our goal is to collect, preserve, and educate about Black history in Chicago's suburban North Shore. We are the only entity of our type on Chicago's suburban North Shore. We are located here in Evanston, currently on the lower level of Sherman Church on the corner of Noyes and Ridge. We've been in existence for 25 years. Now, I just recently found out that our agenda item has been moved to next Monday, but I wanted to take the opportunity just to talk about and just to let everyone know the importance of our agenda item. We've been around for 25 years, and we are now finally asking for the city of Evanston to add us as a normal line item for funding. We haven't decided on an amount yet. I think we're looking at $5 million, hopefully, but we're looking for an amount for funding for us to grow and to continue to be an intricate part of Evanston. Shorefront has been intricate in the development of the reparations item for Evanston, making Evanston the first city in the United States to have reparations legislation enacted. And Shorefront was a huge part of that. Our founder, Mr. Dino Robinson, has been doing this for 25 years, and as the board of directors, we've been in support of him. So I'm not going to take up too much more of your time. I'll hopefully be there in person next week, but I just want to take the opportunity to introduce Shorefront to all of you that may not know it. If you don't know us, please look us up at shorefrontlegacy.org, and you will find out a lot more about us. But please, city directors there, please add us as a line item, normal line item for support, so we can grow and continue to be the catalyst for change and the place where Black history on Chicago's suburban North Shore can come to settle and always be a part, be looked at and viewed and kept. Okay, thank you. That's all I want right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Holmes, are you able to unmute?
Yes, thank you. I couldn't hear you, so I had to go out and come back in. So I'm sorry. I apologize for that.
Not at all. Thanks for
Good
joining us.
evening, everyone, and happy Thanksgiving. I hope all of you are going to enjoy a really great Thanksgiving. I did not get the memo. I came tonight really to ask for support for Shorefront. And if it's postponed until next week, I will certainly come back again. But I just want to say that I am really honored to have been a part of Shorefront since its beginning, so all these 25 years, as an advocate, as a supporter, as a contributor, doing whatever we can to make other Evanstonians aware of the rich history of the Black community in not only Evanston, but along the North Shore. And Dino Robinson, who's the founder, has just done a fantastic job. And as Mr. Ratcliffe said, if you don't know Shorefront, you should really go on the website, but more than important, go by the center and learn about it. I know that one of my goals as an alderman was to find space for Shorefront. We had hoped that we could get that space in Gibbs Morrison, where it would be really close by for schools to be able to come and learn and see the history of Shorefront. So I'm hoping that you will consider Shorefront as an annual contribution in the budget so that that history can continue for those to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The final speaker is Dorian Price.
Thank you for giving me the extra time, Rebby, too. It's wonderful because in listening to what the speakers were saying, I saw commonality. And I guess if anybody would say any of my strengths are, at least starting in grade school, was to bring together a whole bunch of varied pieces of information and somehow or another make sense out of them. But that's how I learn. In terms of attending the budget meeting, it was obvious in terms, and the budget being addressed here in terms of comments, it's obvious that the priorities are determined by staff. And that was said by Tash at our meeting. And that opened up a lot of discussion in terms of inclusion. So what does inclusion have to do with all this? Well, one is with regard to priorities that don't exclude people who need to be addressed. And right now we have low-income people, we know that, right? And people are struggling, and there's programs finally evolving that are going to try to address those. But the priorities should have included a sliding scale this time around. Why not? Because staff was bringing it up, and if they're unaware, how is the council supposed to be aware? And if in your wards you don't have low-income people or enough to worry about, it's not going to be on your radar too in terms of elections. So there are very brave, inclusive council members who are on board right now, so that is a strength of your council. Work on that. As a resident, I urge you, and as a person who's led teams myself, you couldn't have, Mr. Mayor, you couldn't have a better team. So in terms of equity, how do we establish equity? It's inclusion. There's no way. If you don't include the people who are being affected, you're excluding them by definition because you're not aware of that. Some of us are aware of it, and we speak about it and hope you listen to us. I've had the personal experience where someone from another ward with far less income than me helped me financially. That's because that's how it's done in these communities, okay? That's the beauty and the honor of people who have suffered so much in a system that did not favor them in the slightest or give them something in token for what they're doing to help the community. So a sliding scale would be one approach. I can think of a lot more, and I would start with this council. You have everything and everyone here necessary to make that happen. And if, with regard to Shorefront, I can't be more thrilled to support them because that effort started with a dream. And I started out with dreams, and we don't know where that dream's going to take us. That takes a lot of guts. Thank you. And so the fact that that was established says that we have the capacity to do even more. So take Shorefront as your example. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes public comment for the evening. It brings us to special orders of business. Would someone care to make a motion regarding item SP1?
I'll move item SP1, ordinance 99022, the 2023 budget ordinance.
Is there a second? Councilmember Reed moves passage of ordinance 99-0-22. Councilmember Harris seconds. We'll, I think, have lots of discussion on this, but begin with a presentation from our budget team.
Okay, good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. So we have just prepared a presentation. It has the old slides too, but we won't go through that. We would just cover the main decision items and some of those slides which have changed. So not to take up your time and kind of go back into the old presentation. So this is the proposed budget, came down from the original $402 million because of the cuts in the general fund, the CIP. And again, you would see most of the increase because of the capital project and mainly in the water fund side. General capital fund has come down substantially from the original number to a $6 million. These are the decision points so the council can focus on these things. Does the city council approve of the revised CIP projects? So yes, which projects? And I think the Lara last time did the presentations, said this is the attachment A, which I think that council agrees to. So obviously we would need the direction. And then the second piece is how we fund that. First you decide on the projects and then the funding. So how does the city fund the increase for public safety pension? $4.5 million to put the city on a path towards this thing. At the Finance and Budget Committee of the last time, they said we should think about 100% funding with the $2 million out of tax levy and the other $2.5 million out of the general fund surplus. Evanston motor fuel tax, I think there was some confusion. We looked at the document. It is a 5 cents, what we are collecting, what the form on our website, and what our code says. So I just want to tell the council and whether the council needs any action on that in terms of increasing that rate. And how will the city fund the additional amount requested? I think the reparation fund discussion is put off until the December 12th, but at some point, if the city council makes any decision and divert the funds out of the general fund excess surplus, I just want that thing to be part of the overall consideration for the city council so we get the better idea. This is the revised general fund budget. I mean, we have been showing this for the last 2 months. Some of the items, the last 3-4 items are the new one. Use of fund balance 23 budget is now $3.6 million after we made some changes to the revenues and expenses. So it has come down from, I think, originally 4.6. Increase for public safety pension. As I said, Finance Budget Committee said we should look at it and consider the City Council. So we are showing the using of 2.4 million, roughly 5 million of that surplus. And then finally, transfer to reparations fund. We put it there as an item, but we don't know the amount and the council's final decision. Obviously, the council has made the decision to give the $1 million out of that to the reparations fund. So pretty much you would see here that the entire fund is kind of used up, the excess fund balance as of 2021. Changes based on the City Council direction in general PPRT. We had increased the budget originally for 23 based on the current trend to 1.7 million. After we heard that, we looked at it. We increased it by another $500,000 to 2.25 million. I mean, again, a word of caution. This is the income tax paid by some of the corporations and some of the trusts. So if we talk about recession, yes, but I don't want to be, and I hope I'm wrong. The real estate transfer tax increased the projection by another 250,000, same thing. We looked at 2019 numbers when there was uncertainty. I think most of you know that the assessor said there will be a 30% increase in the assessed values when they come up with the 22 numbers as a part of triennial. And that could definitely impact our real estate transfer tax. There's an increased funding for the citywide training and other expenses, I think because of some of those recent complaints and all that. So at the direction of the city manager, we have included these to a variety of training. So these are the changes based on the city council direction. You would see that the last column, and obviously we included so you get an idea where we were and where we are right now. So total revenues and expenses, we are right now balancing at $123 million. Some of the big items, as you see, which has been there, vacancy adjustment was originally 2%, went down up to the 4%, so obviously added extra $1.5 million in savings to the expense. And reduction to the real estate transfer tax, that's $1 million you would see here, which was approved for the ARPA fund. So you see that in 23 budget, general fund would get $1 million less in the, yes.
Did you say ARPA instead of reparations there?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. Yes, general, absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. Sorry for that. The reparations fund, which was approved by the, yeah. So $1 million less in the real estate transfer tax. Changes based on city council direction, again, capital improvement program, projects with substantial funding other than 22 and 23 GO bond funding. So I think Lara explained that, and she's here too, I think, to go over that, where we have the grants, the projects are in progress, so they prioritize it, and I think she mentioned that at the last meeting in the attachment A, if the council decides to go with those in attachment A. Projects under contract, projects with immediate life safety contingency, other projects meeting high priority goals, and the additional projects at the city council request. Some of those projects were added like that. So this is how the capital improvement program looks like. You would see that the total reduction is almost $11 million. GO bond projects for 22 came down by 350. 23 GO bonds originally, if you see the proposed budget, it was around 24 million. Now it came down to only 10.9 million. So more than half. I'm sorry, the reduction of 10.9 million. So roughly half of the programs not there. Other expense for Tweak Park, which is a $400,000, and the GO bond for the water project is down by that $100,000, bringing the total $11 million reduction in our capital project. This is how it looks after that $11 million. Again, originally $103 million in our proposed budget, down to $92 million, and that's $11 million less than the original one. General fund revenues, this is just kind of throwing it out, but obviously whatever the council decides, and either tonight or the next, we will kind of go with that one. Many agencies forecasting, I just got the email last week on Thursday from Fitch rating agency talking about and not only in the US and Europe because of the high gas prices and all that, so they just kind of cautioned everyone. Some of the city's major revenue, sales tax, income tax, transfer tax, building permit could be impacted. And we have seen that in many years, ever since I know that it's since 2008, all the way up to pre-COVID, I think in 2019, we had either the layoffs, cuts, raise, fee increases, tax increase. So I just want the council to kind of keep that in mind. Projected surplus for general fund around 14 million. Higher revenues budgeted, including upward revision. We talked about it, that we revised some of the numbers of transfer tax, PPRT, GEMT, ground emergency, which we get for the ambulance service from the feds. Sales tax, obviously, totaling almost $7.3 million in our budget. And finally, just a thing to, kind of transfer tax to the reparations fund, $1 million for the next year. General fund revenues and expense combined. Again, sometimes I hear from in the last month or so that, okay, we have surplus in this revenue source. General fund includes everything, all revenues. When I said 14 million, it includes whether you have a surplus in transfer tax, will tax, PPRT, sales tax, income tax, everything. And again, we have to remember that, there are thousands of line items within general fund, revenues and expense line items. Some of the items might go up in expenses. We have the higher fuel costs, higher transfer to the insurance fund, higher transfer to this fleet fund or the fuel, for the fuel and all that. So, yes, so it is considered at the fund level that, okay, how is the general fund looking, which includes all revenues and all the expenses. Most of the excess of general fund reserve have been allocated. I showed you, and even the number is pretty close if we add the $2.4 million for the pensions. Final general fund surplus for 22 available in early spring. At that time, I think March, April, we get the final kind of number. Still not final, but at least we get the idea that, okay, this is where we will end. General fund for 23 includes 4.5% wage increase and 4% vacancy rate. And again, that's kind of offsets each other. You see in like, okay, we have a 4.5% increase shown in expense, but then we reduce the expense by 4% as a vacancy. So we'll see that. But if we have a we could fill in all the positions and all that. 3% might be too aggressive in 24, but we'll look at it and let the council know where we stand. And the last thing, very important, all the union contracts are pending, and I guess the way the thing's going, 4.5% may not be enough, may not be close even, and we will have to look at it. I'm not part of that kind of discussions with the unions, but hearing based on the request for the numbers, the council, I just want to make the council aware of that. And obviously the labor market is still tight, and that could be the reason for the higher rate increase there. Police and fire pension funding, this is one of those things. Some of the things which we mentioned earlier, that state requires 90% funded by 2040. City makes progress towards this by depending on the actually determined annual required contribution. Over the past 10 years, city's formula has resulted in contributing $35 million more towards pension than the required. And Finance and Budget Committee agreed to fund at 100% with additional contribution to be funded out of tax levy of $2 million and general fund excess surplus. And finally, this is more important, that we need the direction for pension funding policy. It should be more like a policy or the goal, because I don't want to just based on say, okay, what we have in annual general fund surplus. If we have, say, next year, good year, instead of 24 million, suddenly we say double it. Or we don't have 14 million and only 2 million in surplus, potentially because of recession, and we say, oh, we don't want to fund them, that's a bad idea too. And the rating agencies and others, they look at it very negatively. So I would sincerely request the council to have a more a funding policy and goal, because this is a long-term thing. This is not one time. So that's my sincere request to look at as a policy level, no matter what we have, but okay, this is our commitment to have the police and fire pension funding. So this is where, these are the new slides, changes which we brought about, and some of those main items which I can go back and, right here.
I'm going to actually just ask a quick clarifying question before I go to council members. There was I forget it now, 7 point something number of increased revenue estimates.
Right here.
So that's the increase.
In the budget.
From what?
From the last year.
So that's an increase from the 22 budgeted number.
Right.
And how does that number compare to the, at this moment, projected 2022 actual?
22, we have to look at it, because we don't know, because these are only 10 or 12 revenue items could be where we have the increase of 7.3 million, some of the major revenues. But I can have the numbers, we can look at just those 8 numbers. Overall, when I came out with the September numbers, and we projected that, okay, we would end with the 14 million surplus.
Understood. Okay. Councilmember Kelly.
Well, I just want to clarify from the Finance and Budget Committee, you are correct that we did, the support was to fully fund the pension, and if needed, to go as high as increasing the levy by 2 million, but only if needed. That was the point. Not that that's what we necessarily needed to do. That was not what we said was if we had to go there, we would. So I would advocate that it come from the surplus. That is a known deficit that we have. That's a known liability, that we should take the 4.5 out of there. And additionally, I was on the phone today with IDOR. We're going to get another payment in December with the PPRT. So I think we don't have here the projected year-end fund balance estimates like we've had all the other years going back to 2013. This year we don't have those. And really, as you know, the stewards of our budget and the public should be able to see what those estimated year-end fund balance summaries are. And this year we don't have it. We had it last year. It goes all the way back to 2013, but we don't have those. So
No, council member, when we said 14 and a half, which we did, which is operating surplus.
No, I
plus-
understand.
Plus
That-
you can add this number, which is 17 million. So, yeah, we would be.
But we
at
don't. If I
around
look at
32
all
million.
the budgets, I can go from every fund, because all the funds we have a reserve amount, right? Mostly it's 16.6, but some funds we keep a different percentage of reserve. And in previous years, there's an estimated, also projected estimated year end. And for example, like, you know, that we're going to get another PPRT. We don't have the estimated year end in transfer tax. That was available. We don't have that. That's where we're at now. Like, I don't think our PPRT right now is way over what was budgeted at, I think, 3.2 million, and we're going to get another payment in December. And I know the fiscal year it exceeded $4 million. So, you know, I'm going to guess that maybe the calendar year will be similar. So I think that additional funding isn't represented in here. Anyway, I would advocate fully that we take it from our surplus budget. We have a reserve, a 16.6, that will be more than sufficient to absorb any shocks next year, and not just in the reserve fund. Everybody should be very clear that we have a reserve balances we keep in many funds, I think 10 different funds. So, but I just want to make that point clear from the finance and budget, that we want to fully fund, and only if it were necessary to go up to 2 million over. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Seeing
Mr.
no
Mayor,
one-
this is Councilmember Newsom here.
Councilmember Nusma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question, it's probably for Hitesh, with regards to the PPRT. And we exchanged some emails on this, but I'd like to elaborate a little bit more. Why is the PPRT revenue so much higher this year than it has been in previous years? And what can we expect moving forward? Is this a trend? Is this an anomaly? Please elaborate.
Thank you, Councilmember Newsma. I think, yes, I replied to your email, and I'm going by what we hear or see from the IML or the IDOR. One of the thing is the most important one could be the inflation, yes. I mean, everybody's getting paid at a higher rate. And the PPRT is the kind of, when they abolish corporate income tax, personal property tax, and this is paid by the corporations and some of those things. So they pay obviously on those higher revenues, just like we get a higher sales tax and other revenues on the gross fees. So that's the one thing. Second thing, I mentioned some of those things, IML, that, if the federal government thinking about some law changes, and that could impact how we calculate the income and what is the income tax liability for those people, the corporations and institutions paying the PPRT. So IML has in one of the article kind of a caution that. And the third thing which I saw that, okay, they are predicting 13% reduction next year in the revenue from this year. So again, yes, we have to, and we look
This
at
year
the-
is so much higher by a factor of, I don't know,
Right.
five times higher. Like what? Like that came out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
Should we have expected this, or why is it so much higher this year? It's not something that the city of Evanston controls. It's purely state policy. And what happened in Springfield that led to this windfall for the city?
Right. So as I mentioned earlier, and then they keep on updating the IML, but that's why what we look at it, and not just in the PPRT, but other taxes too, we look at the pre-COVID numbers to give us a better idea, like say 5-year average from 2014 to 2019. And if you would see that graph, it's like more or less in line with our range. Again, when you see the numbers overall, they are total numbers. Out of that, we give, as I mentioned earlier, too, $325,000 to the police pension and $280,000. So little over $600,000 goes to the thing. That being said, we had originally budgeted, because we looked at this higher number, as you mentioned, Council Member, at $1.7 million, compared to even our $600,000, which was a budget for '22. And finally, when we looked at the higher number in October, we kind of, again, raised it by $500,000. But this is all, yeah, I mean, it's subject to state action. It is subject to the, like inflation, as it says, if it goes down to recessions. And IML is, even at today, they're predicting that, okay, there would be a 13% reduction. So
30% reduction from this year, which was, order of magnitude higher than previous years.
Right.
So I'm still struggling to understand why this year was so remarkably high compared to history.
And again, it's mainly because of those higher incomes. Everybody, because of the inflation, I mean, being paid
And
higher.
that to me, that would account for maybe 10, 15% increase, not a 5-fold increase.
I mean, let me see, what did I mention in one of the things besides that? Let me check my email. Yeah, so they see the inflation. They mentioned one of the reasons, could be that, okay, they've kind of filled in some of the loopholes in the Tax Act. But at the same time, I think I mentioned that they are worried about one of those kind of tax change, which is coming from the federal government and which could impact. Now, these are all uncertainties, yes. So we don't know what would happen, whether it would be a recessionary, whether the inflation would be there down to a normal 2%. And that's why we said, okay, let's go by the roughly 15% less, as IML says, by revising our budget upward.
I think
Thank you.
Clayton,
I'm done for now.
1 second, Councilmember. I think we're going to have another take on this.
Mayor, members of the City Council, Clayton Black, Budget Manager. As Mr. Desai said, so we took a look at all of our revenues, and this was one that has really confused us a lot because it has been so much higher. I think, in a nutshell, as Mr. Desai said, it's closing the loopholes. It's a new corporate income tax structure at the state of Illinois that a Democratic majority in Springfield has enacted in order to generate additional corporate income taxes. So largely, a new tax structure, close the loopholes, higher income. The payments are super sporadic. Many corporations are paying quarterly, which is why we see big payments in September, July, kind of every quarter. And then we see smaller payments in November and December. It's been really difficult to predict. And IML, as Mr. Desai said, and many other publications has talked on how difficult it has been to predict and whether or not it's sustainable. So we've looked at it really, really closely. We feel comfortable with the budget number we're at now, but matching the totals of this year. And one other additional point, in September 2021, the state deposited a huge amount of money into this fund that was distributed in early 2022. So we actually got money in 2022 that was part of this big transfer from 2021. So it's been super sporadic, lots of factors playing into this, kind of causing this really large number in 2022. Hopefully that answers the question.
But we can reasonably expect it to be significantly higher compared to previous years because the loopholes have been closed, just not quite as high as it was this year.
As long as this corporate income tax structure remains in place by the state of Illinois, we can expect it to be higher than it was in previous years, but it's very new, and we'll see if it's sustainable.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'm done for now.
So no one is requesting to speak for the first time, so we'll go back to Councilmember Kelly with 2.5 minutes.
So just another comment on the PPRT. So it is sporadic, and I agree, it's very complicated and very confusing. It dates back to 1970s and how they do their calculations. However, there are predictions, and you can file, the IML does give its estimates, and they're pretty much right on the money. And so they are predicting a 30%, about a little over 30% decline for next year, but that's based on our actual. And the problem that I've seen over the past couple of years is that we've just had this one sort of fixed number of 600,600. And there should have been a drastic increase. They had predicted, more than a doubling by this year, almost a tripling from 2020. But in fact, we just kept, budgeting the same really low amount. So based on our actual for this year, which is going to be even larger than it currently is now at 3.2 million, probably going to exceed 4 million. Based on that, you take that, and then it's reduced by the 30%. Or 35%. I think that's where the IML is, what they're estimating. So I just want to make that point, that it's always based on our actuals. What we have been budgeting over the past couple of years really hasn't reflected our actuals and what the IML and others were predicting how much that would increase. So in turn, the taxpayers end up paying, so to speak. So now I'm guessing that by year's end, and this is what I really think we're all owed, is those year-end summaries that have been prepared for council in the past by fund. We're probably going to be close to a $3 million surplus in the PPRT. That should go to our pension. I mean, it is intended for pension, and so let's put that all towards our pension. And I think then with the additions, some of the other additions, like in terms of transfer tax, I think we can easily fund our pensions fully this year without raising the levy. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Reed.
I want to gather an understanding of. So our goal is to pass the budget next week, correct? Now on the 28th?
Well, goal is a sophisticated word. I think my goal is to pass a good budget that does the right thing for the city as quickly as that can be done. I think if we are, as a body, kind of converging on something where there's a shared level of comfort, then yeah, I would say vote tonight and make final tweaks and pass it next Monday. If that's unrealistic, I think we take a little bit of extra time and do it right.
Okay. I asked that because I just want to gain an understanding of, where we are on just making a decision about. I think there's agreement. I think I've seen agreement on almost everyone here that we should get to 100% this year. I think that's an accurate read of the council. And if that is where we want to get to, I think we know, what the PPRT is going to be for 2023. I think it's time to maybe just make a decision about how we fund this, whether are we actually going to entertain raising property taxes to come up with half of the funding, or are we going to take this fully from our general fund and general fund, surplus/reserve? So I'm ready to have that conversation. And I guess I'm supportive really either way. I think we need to get there. I'd prefer to take it from general fund reserves, but then also thinking about long term, we may need to raise property taxes at some point for the long term to fund this. Year over year, as Director Desai said, we don't want to rely on general fund reserves year after year to pay this down. So I think that's really the conversation we need to have. Are we going to raise property taxes this year? Or are we going to shove that off down the line, for next year, the year after? That's it. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing that no one is asking to speak for the first.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes?
This is Councilmember Hedekadis.
Councilmember
I had a
Hedekadis.
question. I had a question for staff, and I apologize for not being there in person. I'm curious how not next year, but it would be the 2024 capital improvement plan. I know next year for 2023, we had a really large number because of COVID and a lot of projects being delayed, which, we've obviously, pumped the brakes and are further delaying a couple of those projects. Typically, what number do we spend on capital improvement from year to year, and how does that potentially affect our overall budget going forward?
Hello, members of council. My name is Laura Biggs. I'm the city engineer. So what is our typical budget? Our capital improvement budget is $40 to $60 million annually, of which approximately $10 million is general obligation bonds. What is actually driving the increase in our capital improvement budget is actually, one, increasing costs over time. It will just generally go up to do the same amount of work. But particularly in parks and facilities, it's that we have delayed work on several buildings and several parks for so long that we're seeing just an increasing amount of projects that are done to be reactive to parks or to equipment in buildings and parks that's already failing by the time we get to it. So our reactive capital improvement is going up.
Thank you.
Councilmember Harris.
There we go. My question to you, I know we talked about this before. Have we started putting the parks and the different things on a schedule so that we don't run into these issues again as far as things waiting and then being at a failed place? Have we started monitoring and creating a schedule of maintenance?
The types of failures that we're seeing aren't really related to how much maintenance our maintenance crew does. They're pretty good about getting around to stuff, although they're also stretched somewhat thin. But more like equipment that was designed to last 15 years that is 25 years old or older. So those are the kinds of things we're seeing. And in terms of replacing it, we would need to play some catch up. But even this year, I mean, we see what that does to the budget. We put in all the things we should do if we want to keep up with the things that are going wrong, and that's just not affordable for us with our current funding mechanisms.
Right, so you spoke to it. So again, a schedule, if we know something is to last 15 years, we should be looking 12 years, possibly 17, you look below and above that. We need to have that schedule so that we can then create a budget that allows us to do that instead of all of a sudden everything's failed because it's 10 years past that point. So that's my question. Have we started looking at doing that so that we don't run into that continual problem of things being 10 years past due, and then we fall into, we've got to fix everything because it's collapsing?
The staff has begun assembling information about the expected life of amenities in parks. I mean, every amenity has its own expected life, and has started to put together some estimated costs just in big, broad numbers. We have entered into a contract with a consultant to do a strategic master plan for the park system, and we will be working with that consultant to try to get better information on how to put things onto a more regular schedule.
Thank you.
That does not answer your facilities question. Facilities, we've been okay.
So with no one asking to speak for the first time, we'll go to Councilmember Kelly for the third crack with 50 seconds left.
So if there's any amending that would have to happen now because we're taking action, or I just want to understand.
No, there would not. I mean, these are all ordinances that are on the agenda for introduction. So,
but we'll vote, or?
So on the table right now is a motion to vote on it. If that were to pass, then the final action could be as soon as next Monday, at which point amendments would have to occur.
Okay, so like if I wanted to have us fully fund the pensions using the surplus, taking the excess from the PPRT plus if it's an extra 1.5 out of the 14.1, I would make an amendment now for that?
You could do it now, or you could do it next week.
No time like the present.
Okay, well then I guess I'll do that now, and I could also do it next week, correct?
Well, if you did it now and it passed, it'd be weird to do it again next
Got
week.
it.
I mean,
Okay.
I'll just say, I'm really not, maybe I'm on an island here. I'm not sold on what we got an email today from the chair of the Finance and Budget Committee, and I wasn't at the meeting that you and Mr. Desai had a different characterization of, but, he was reiterating this position in opposition to putting the full 4.5 additional million in without a property tax increase. I'm interested in hearing more options myself, but certainly you can make a motion to amend the budget at any time, including now.
Okay, well, I'd like to amend the budget now to use and I've sent everybody the exact numbers. Last time you wanted the exact numbers. Do I need to pull that up? I've sent them. I got the actuary. Jason gave us a full.
I want and always want the amendment in writing.
Okay, so I'll prepare the amendment.
Mayor Biss, I see a light on. Well, I don't see the light on, but I know a light was flipped.
So there's some lights on. I'm thinking in response to the amendment that's about to happen. Councilmember Kelly, would you be comfortable with a debate going on while you're in the process of? All right. So then the next two speakers are Council Members Burns and Nguyen. Councilmember Burns.
Yeah. So to meet the new schedule that has been proposed to be fully funded, for our pensions to be fully funded at 100%, does the $4.5 million take into account the increase in the PPRT amount for 2023?
The $4.5 million pension funding, it has nothing to do with the PPRT. PPRT is in general fund, police and fire pension fund, they have their own funds, and they sit separately from the general fund.
Okay, so we still need to find 4.5. I think my concern is there was a motion made at the last meeting to put, $2 million out of the reserves to the reparations program, and so I would want to know what the math is looking like at this point. Because I don't know if we are we able to do the 4.5 increase to for our pensions and the $2 million for reparations out of the reserve fund without something else happening? So I just want to make sure that
It is for the city council, and that's why I think I mentioned in my earlier thing that.
I guess we can do it, but what would that put our what would we be at in terms of
Right now,
reserve, general fund reserve?
If you look at it, Councilmember Burns, first we talk about the year which has already ended, 21. So we have excess of 11.7. Without reparations, we have like 10.9. So pretty much used up the surplus as of 21. So now whatever comes, that comes out of the excess of 22, current year surplus.
So if we took 4.5 out plus 2 million for reparations, what percentage would that put our reserve, general fund reserve at? Do you know?
It might be hard because I don't know how we would enter it. And even if I go with the, like say, $14 million surplus, 17 plus $14 million, so we would be right around again at $31 million. And our requirement, and again, the council, I don't know whether to take the decision that the staff has proposed to go to the 18% this year from 16.6, plus the additional expenditure. So it could be a 3 or 4 million more. So there would be still some surplus there based on the current estimates of like even $7 to $8 million. But these are, again, just I'm kind of giving you the numbers. Yeah, but that's the best estimates as of now when we are not done with the year end.
Councilmember Nguyen, followed by Ravel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hitesh, or Mr. Desai, do we know that this is not what I was going to ask initially, but so this year, in order to fully fund, we need to put in 4.5 million. Can we predict going forward how much we need to put in every year in order to fully fund?
I mean, it could be more or less, because now you are at a higher path, and you have to sustain that higher path. And again, as I said, pension funding is an everyday changing number based on retirement, disability pension, stock market, how that does. So a lot of kind of moving parts. But that's, yeah, one of the thing is that this is not one time that, okay, we give 4.5 and now, okay, that's okay, we will go back to our old days and we'll be fine. No.
Right.
This will be kind of going every year, more or less the same amount.
So that approximately 4.5 million, give or take
You're right.
a million or so?
I mean, stock market
Right.
is a main driving force too, so yeah, that would impact. But you're right, yeah. It's like every year you have to look at it. And that's why I said that the council should look at more like a sustainable funding policy for the pensions going out.
Yes, and I think, Mr. Mayor, you made the comment about the email we received today from Mr. Livingston, Chair of Finance and Budget. And I think, I am concerned, I think like all of us, we would like to fund the pensions 100%, not continue to kick the can down the road. But I am concerned about what that means each of the next successive 17 years, 18 years. And what is our plan then for 3 years from now, from 4 years from now, or 5 years from now? And one of the things that I thought was that it gave me that made me think it was a good idea in Mr. Livingston's email, excuse me, was developing a plan so that we know how much we're going to spend every year, predicting out as best we can, so that we know when 10 years from now, we know approximately how we are going to fund, the amount that we're going to fund, and what's our sustainable method of funding. I've been on the council long enough to know that these numbers go up and go down, and that even our best predictions sometimes can prove to be disastrously wrong, with disastrous consequences for us. So I am leery of spending all of this from our surplus without knowing where that lands us in the next year or two. Yeah.
Councilmember Ravel.
Well, I guess I echo some of the concerns expressed by Councilmember Wynn. I do think early on, I believe Mr. Desai mentioned that we should really have adopt a policy, a pension funding policy. And so this planning work that Councilmember Wynn just mentioned would result in us adopting a policy for how we're going to fully fund the pensions going forward. And I too am reluctant to dip too far into the projected or anticipated or hoped for reserves, because we do have some other potential costly expenses that are not in our budget at the moment. For example, we don't know yet the outcome of the negotiations for the wage increases for our many of our staff for next year, and that could really require a considerable amount of our anticipated reserves or excesses or whatever. And then I guess I did have a question for Councilmember Burns. It was late when we were talking last week, I guess, but I mean, I know that we agreed that we wanted to use $1 million from our real estate transfer tax from the properties that sell for over $1.5 million. And so, but I don't remember this additional amount requested for the reparations fund.
So Councilman Reed could probably speak to it, because he made a motion, I think, late in the hour to place it on as a special order, was it? I was gonna bring it up anyway, but then he.
So we haven't really talked about that yet.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Which is probably why I'm not ready to vote on the 4.5 today, because I want to discuss that along with that special order of business on the 28th. I thought it was the 28th. Hitesh, you said December something.
So
12th,
there is a little bit of a air traffic control problem here, let's say. Two different motions passed last week. One was to delay what was actually on the agenda, which was $5 million from ARPA, till December 12th. The other was to put a special order of business for $2 million from reserves on November 28th. So that's an issue that we'll have to work through as well, because I think those are, I think certainly in your mind, Councilmember Burns, and I agree with you on this, those are related issues. They're not totally separate. So Councilmember Ravel still has the floor.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm basically saying I'm not ready to vote on much of anything tonight.
So at this time, no one is asking to speak for the first time. So we've got some second cracks and a fourth crack. So we'll start with the second people requesting to speak for a second time, which is Councilmember Newsma, followed by Reed. Councilmember Newsma with 3:35 left.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question. I want to talk about our reserve policy. So a question for Mr. Desai. As I understand it, our policy or the direction that we are planning to go is to slowly, gradually increase our reserve policy from the 16.6% up to 20% over a period of 4 years. Is that something that we have voted on? Is this a formal policy, or is this our kind of informal understanding at this point?
Councilmember Newsma, that is the staff proposal. What council has adopted as of now is 16.66. In light of yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I will suggest that given a potential looming recession in 2023, plus the uncertainty on our expense side with regards to our 4 union contracts, not to mention the discussion we're having about trying to find whatever funding we can to to fund our pensions at 100%, that I don't think it is wise to increase our reserve policy for 2023. I'd love to have 20% in reserves, but making that step along with all the other steps we're trying to make next year, something's got to give. And I'm going to suggest that, holding back on increasing our reserves for the 2023 budget is something that we can wait on.
So just to clarify, and again, staff has to go by the council's direction. What we have suggested is 18% for the next year, then 19, and then finally the 20%. So I don't know what direction you want, that we hold off just for next year, or we totally take it out entirely and leave it as 16.66.
I'm suggesting we keep it at 16.66 for next year.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Reed with 3 minutes left.
Yes, I will agree with Councilmember Newsma there. I also think we should keep our reserve balance at 16.66% for now. I also, well, things have shifted a bit. I do want to note two things, because I've heard the word reserve used for where this pension funding is coming from, and from my understanding, it's not coming from our reserve; it's coming from our surplus. And so I just want to make sure that we're clear on that language, because it's important. There's a difference. I'm not going to go deep into it, but I do want to note that with what Mayor Biss said, that the $2 million that's not on the agenda tonight, but it should be on our minds. The $2 million for reparations is very different from the economic development funding. The economic development funding would be for a new program. The $2 million would be to cover our seniors who our ancestors, as they're termed with the reparations program, who have not yet received funding. So they're both reparations, but very different uses of the funds, and I don't want them to get too muddied with each other, because they shouldn't. That's it for now. Thank you.
As a point of information, could we clarify the difference between surplus and reserves?
It's still what's left, right?
I mean, again,
It's what's left. So, I mean, I get your point, but the way
I
I'm
mean,
looking
that
at it
is
is
more
yeah.
academic or for our purpose. If some other city has 18%, 20%, it is all called general fund reserves.
Right, exactly.
As a whole, yeah.
Well, I do want to, sorry to, if I can, for 20 seconds, just interject here, but
Councilmember Reed still just barely has the floor.
Okay, thank you. There is, dipping into our reserves is something that we should take with a different sense of caution than dipping into surplus. And I really think that needs to be hammered in. Yes, it's all money that's in the bank that's not allocated to something, but dipping into your savings is much different than dipping into extra money that you've got lying around.
And you're right, council member, but when we just kind of submit, like our budget prepare, we would say use of the fund balance. Because
Sure.
don't
Yeah, I
forget
mean,
the fund balance.
I guess, I don't know why I'm wading into this, but in a moment of weakness, great point, except that the surplus is potentially somewhat artificial, right? It's not like, oh, we're going to have a surplus every year forever, and so every year we get to decide what to do with it. It's more of, we've got, a lot of vacancies which contributed to the surplus. We have significant federal funding that assisted us in various ways that is that's proposed to be entirely expended shortly. And then we have this kind of anticipated cost trajectory related to both inflation and the collective bargaining. And so, I mean, of course, the surplus becomes a reserve at midnight on New Year's Eve, and I don't know that we have the luxury of anticipating future surpluses, and so I don't think of it in quite the same way as I would if it was like every year we get to spend our Christmas bonus. Let's decide what to do with it this year. Councilmember Kelly, from whom I still have not received an email, is that correct?
Well, I'm sensing that folks aren't comfortable voting tonight at all, so I don't want to put that out to everybody to have to vote. If everyone's not comfortable and we're all willing to hold this, then I would prefer I'll send it to you, but I would prefer to bring that forward at our next meeting, if that's where we're at. That's what I'm hearing. So, but one thing I also want to say, Mr. Livingston wrote not on behalf of the Finance and Budget Committee. I want to make that very clear. That was his personal opinion, but he was there when we all, unanimously agreed to fully fund at the time at the Finance and Budget Committee. So I want to make that point. I also want to make it clear that I agree with Councilmember Reed. There is a difference. We are allocating 16.6, which is about a little over $20 million towards our reserve fund that we agreed on. The surplus is above and beyond that. But we don't really have a clear accounting this year, and we really need that. And as Mr. Black pointed out to me, we didn't include that in this year's budget. We have in past budgets, where you could see the year end, what remained in the final, what they called the ending fund balance. We would get these general fund summaries, ending fund balance, and what percent of the fund that represents, so you would know how much we need to levy in order to get to that 16.6. So it would be, I think for the sake of transparency, I would say, since it looks like we're going to hold this over this evening, it would be great if we could get that, and not just for the general fund, but we keep reserves in, I think, 10 funds, right? About 10 funds we have a reserve balance, and it would be nice to see really what that is and what that amounts to, what the total is. I would ask if we could get that for our next meeting. I think that's really, about transparency, and for us to be informed when we make that decision. I don't think we want to vote blindly, not really understanding it. I trust what you say, that we have 14.1 million and we've levied for the 16.6, but we can't really see those numbers. So it would be nice in the budget. I know in the budget memos you've said there's this amount, and I can go through all the quarterlies, but it should be in our budget. I'm just looking at all the ones all the way back to 2013. It was always presented. We had these general fund summaries with the ending fund balance, and we even have the estimated year end, which we don't have this year either. So I think that would be great also in terms of for folks to be able to make a more informed decision with regard to whether or not to, again, as Councilmember Reed pointed out, take it from the surplus. We're not talking about touching that cushion. We set aside 16.6 to absorb those shocks that Mayor Biss spoke of. That's why we set that. And that 16.6 is plenty cushion to absorb those shocks for next year. Thank you.
So your time is up, Councilmember. I think I want to make sure the budget team properly understood the request. Is that, guys, was that request from Councilmember Kelly clear? No, I think the request is for us to have it in writing well in advance of next Monday. Is that doable?
I mean, I don't know whether we need for all the fund balance, because we are talking here about the general fund, and we cannot just kind of divert the money from one fund to the other. So what we do, I mean, general fund is our main operating budget, and that's where I think we.
Well, I mean, there was a request from a council member. Is that something that can be complied with relatively straightforwardly?
We can come up with kind of a best estimates
All right.
For each of the funds. But again, I just want to stress that okay, you might say, okay, we have 20 million in water fund.
No, of course, of course. Of course.
But this is what our projections are for the general fund, that, okay, how we would end the year.
Seeing that again, I guess no one has. All right, so we'll go to folks asking to speak for a second time, which is to say Councilmember Burns with 4 minutes left.
So let's say we used increases in our property tax levy to meet the increase in our pension contributions, to identify a source of funding to consistently maintain those increases. Can we both do that, but also years where there is a surplus, say, all right, we don't need to increase the levy because there is a surplus and there's a will from the council to use the surplus funds in that year instead of property increases? Could that be possibly a part of a policy that we put together? Because I would want it to be that dynamic, because I think in years where the money is there in surplus, I don't think we should.
You can put it something like that, that, okay, if the general fund balance is about 20% or 25%, rest would go to the pension funds.
Okay.
And if there's any shortage, then only the taxes, something like that, yes,
Okay.
definitely.
All right, good. All right.
Next, with a minute 20 left, is Councilmember Reed.
Are we, are we done with the property, are we done with this discussion? So I want to move on to another topic. It seems like I think we're at.
Well, in that case, let me jump in.
Okay, go ahead.
So I have sort of a question. I have a question and a comment. The question is very similar to Councilmember Burns' question, but for this year in particular. It seems to me, and I'll acknowledge that a lot of numbers went by fast, but it seems to me there's still a disagreement between Councilmember Kelly and others about what appropriate revenue estimate for example, the PPRT is, perhaps even also the real estate transfer tax. It also appears to be the case that there's some inevitable ambiguity about what our year-end actual will be in 2022, given that it's November now. Could you enumerate some options along the lines of, hey, for example, here's the PPRT revenue that we're assuming, but we recognize it may go over. In the event that it goes over, the overage goes up to the pensions, or something analogous for our end of year 2022, or something analogous for RETT. Are there some options like that you could enumerate for us?
I mean, again, this is the fund balance policy, and it's strictly not by the state mandate or any other external. It is by the city council. So if you can just.
No, I'm not asking about the fund balance at all. The fund balance is unrelated to what I'm discussing. What I'm saying is, I am really sensitive to the history that you've described to me privately, that I think you've also described at the dais, that there have been years that there's been pressure from up here to increase revenue estimates, and then those kind of elected official driven estimates turned out to be wrong, and we were in a really bad spot at the end of the year. So I appreciate your being assertive on that, but also part of being assertive and conservative is that we kind of expect there's a decent chance you will undershoot. What I'm saying is, could we put into the budget particularly on some of these kind of hot button revenue areas where there really seems to be a difference of opinion. And as Mr. Black indicated, just some real uncertainty, right? Like, whoa, who knows exactly what's going on with PPRT, and therefore who knows what's going to go on next year. Could we perhaps allocate hypothetical revenue that would increase your more conservative projection to the pension fund? Sounds like there's some people who are really confident that's going to come in, but also it allows us to have the contingency in the event that it doesn't.
I mean, yes, you can do many ways. I mean, we can think about it, but right away, like suppose you can just take revenues as a whole and say, okay, if we get revenues above 102%, 3%, any excess would go towards that. Or you can go like particularly if we talk more about real estate transfers and PPRD, that okay, if we have more than 105% in those line items, then any excess would go to. So yeah, I mean, there are many ways we can try to have that kind of more like a dedicated source of revenue. Something happened here for reparations, $1 million for graduated transfer tax. Similar to that, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I think that's worth, I know there's, next Monday is a week from today, and there's a lot of holiday time between now and then, but I think it's worth thinking through that for obvious reasons. The other thing I just want to say in the spirit of a comment is I do really want to join the chorus of people saying, whatever we decide this year, we should view this as like, whew, it's the, right before the buzzer, we're just going to do our best, do a good faith effort, but not the way we ought to do this in general. And I think we ought to have a policy. I think the policy ought to be, illustrative of how we fund whatever level of funding we determine, but also I think it should be a real decision, given a lot of different options which do exist, of what we want our funding schedule to be, right? The state gives us a formula, and I think we're having this conversation because we don't really trust the state's formula, rightly, in my opinion. But then what we're saying is, let's just change the 90 to 100 and call it a day, when in fact there's a number of assumptions embedded in the state's formulas, assumptions about how they smooth investment returns, there's assumptions that we make about our discount rates, there's just basic different types of formulas utilized. Those of you who followed this on the state level have seen, Ralph Martiri has been advocating for structuring a pension payment as a mortgage so it doesn't increase with inflation at all. There's a million different options, and I don't think we should just say 100 is a better number than 90 and end the conversation there. I think we should just make a determination with a long-term plan of what we think is truly the most responsible way of doing this. And I think it's great that this year we'll just find as much money as we can to supplement the inadequate status quo. But then let's really make sure we get it right. Not next November, not next October, not next August, but next winter and this coming winter and spring, so we can build a budget around a plan that really makes sense. Sorry, I don't like talking up here, but this is an important issue. That informally, though there's no rules here, but that informally kind of ends the pension portion of our discussion of SP1. Moving on, Councilmember Reed with 1:20 left to discuss other items.
Yeah. I don't like being publicly mistaken, and I was publicly mistaken here on this dais last week when I assumed that the motor fuel tax was 3 cents as opposed to 5 cents. It was changed a few years ago by a former council. I still think we should increase the motor fuel tax by just 1 cent. It'll bring in less revenue than I anticipated because that was assuming that it's 3 cents. It'll probably bring in about $100,000. Maybe staff has another estimate. But I think, Hitesh, if you do, please feel free to jump in.
I mean, in the current environment, because of the COVID, 5 cents bring us around 800,000. So you're talking about 160,000.
For a 1 cent increase? Right, yeah. So I think, that 1 cent there would still be substantial and help us move toward our CARB goals, we'd still be below Chicago. Some folks, with the other estimate, were worried that things might blow up if we were to move to 5 cent. And, well, we've been there for a few years, and guess what? Folks are still here. So another penny, I don't think, is going to, just as that 2 cent a few years ago didn't have a major impact. In fact, I'd really recommend 2 cent still, but it would bring in substantial revenue for us to put toward our CARB goals. It's, none of this is ever easy. There's some arguments, some folks referred to the wheel tax as regressive. That's an assumption. Some folks may see the motor fuel tax as regressive. That's also an assumption. I think, again, if we're putting this money into increasing mobility, if we're putting it into protecting our environment, I think a 1 cent increase makes sense. And so I'd still like to move forward with that if there's still support. And again, this revenue can, as I said, support our CARB. I'd want that 1 cent increase to be dedicated to, meeting our CARB goals through transportation.
So, Councilmember, first of all, your time is up. Second of all, didn't a motion pass on this last week?
Yeah. One, I want to make sure that everyone is clear that I want to, both for my colleagues who I'm sure are aware of this, and then for the public, make sure we're correcting the record publicly. But I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're still supportive of the 1 cent increase. So just transparency when I was wrong about something.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk please take the roll?
Oh, wait for what? Daniel, do we have to move to hold it since we said we wanted to hold it? SP 1 and 2?
Well, you can't hold it. It's special order. Did folks want to table this?
Or
Or that was
table,
not-
I'm sorry, table it. I mean, that's why I didn't amend it, because the
I think it's your
sentiment
point. We
was
can't
to hold
pass it on the 28th if we don't.
I mean,
move it
so
along.
one thing we could do
We could
is
suspend
vote
the
on it
rules.
now and then have the final vote next week, before which any amendments could occur. Another thing we could do is not vote on it now and have a first vote next week and then a second vote in December. So I guess what I would say is, if y'all feel like there's a chance you might be ready to be at resolution a week from today, then it's probably worth voting on now so that we're positioned to do that. But if not, then not.
Point of information or
Councilmember Reed.
something. Yeah, I would support a hold. I mean, a tabling, if that motion is made. And I think, to your point that you've made a number of times, if we're planning on adopting the budget next week, I don't think we should be making a bunch of amendments to it and then adopting it the same night. We should make those amendments, allow that week or at least a week of breathing time, and then adopt it. So I either support a hold tonight, a tabling tonight, or something. So I'll second that, Councilmember Kelly.
So are you making a motion, Councilmember?
Am I making a motion to table it? Just to table SP 1 and SP 2 until the 28th.
I mean, could I respectfully why don't you just batch them all together, SP1 through SP?
I suppose, but the other ones seem like they're separate from.
All right, okay, that's fine.
I think everything else is.
All right.
I mean,
It makes sense to table everything.
The whole
Well, it's
shebang?
your motion, not mine, as you wish. So,
all the way up to.
so what is the?
Okay,
let
then
me
I'll
get say
table,
this.
I guess, SP 1 through SP 8. Okay, so SP 1 through SP 8.
Until what date?
SP 8 until the 28th.
Councilmember Kelly moves to table special orders of business 1 through 8 to the November 28th regular meeting of the Evans City Council. Is there a second? Second. Councilmember Nguyen seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Harris? Aye. Councilmember Nguyen? Aye. Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Oh, Newsma's here now.
Yes,
Councilmember
aye.
Newsma?
Aye.
Is the burden on now or no?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we got it, sorry.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries, and items SP1 through SP8 are tabled until 1 week from today. This brings us to item SP9. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll move item SP9, ordinance 116-022, amending City Code Section 8411 to revise sanitation service charges.
Second.
Councilmember Reed moves passage of ordinance 116-0-22. Councilmember Harris seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll? Oh, go ahead, clerk.
Okay.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris. Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries, and item ordinance 116-0-22 is passed, and this was for action. Would someone care to make a motion on item SP10?
I'll move item SP10, ordinance 121-022, amending City Code Chapter 12, Sections 71271, rates established, and 71217, charges, rates, fees, and penalties.
Councilmember Reed moves passage of ordinance 121-0-22. Councilmember Ravel seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, and again, this is final action. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen. Aye. Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries, and ordinance 121-0-22 is passed. And finally, SP11. Would someone care to make a motion on this item?
Yeah, I'll move ordinance 117-022, amending City Code Chapter 13, Section 713.3, regarding the affordable sewer rate annual payment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Councilmember Reed moves passage of ordinance 117-0-22. Councilmember Nguyen seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, and this too is final action. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries, and ordinance 117-0-22 is passed. We're going to juggle the order of the next 2 items on the agenda and skip quickly to call of the wards. Councilmember Harris.
Just want to remind everyone that our ward meeting is November 29th at Evanston Township High School. I wanted to commend the Black employees for standing up for their rights and being brave and courageous to talk about that. And I look forward to everyone having a safe and happy Thanksgiving.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Yes, on Thursday, December 1st, I'll have my office hours at Brothers K from 7:30 to 10 o'clock in the morning. And happy Thanksgiving to everyone.
Councilmember Nusma.
Happy Thanksgiving. No further report.
Councilmember Burns.
Fifth Ward meeting, December 1st, 7 p.m. virtual.
Councilmember Ravel.
I'm going to have the 3rd special topic stadium ward meeting on December 15th, and the topic is going to be event day management, which will include things like parking and traffic at 7 p.m.
Councilmember Reed.
Yes, our 8th Ward meeting will obviously not be next Thursday as it's Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving to all of my colleagues and 8th Warders who pay attention this late at night and other folks. So we'll be having it December 1st. Well, instead of a Saturday, we're just going to do it the next Thursday at 6 o'clock, and so notice will go out about that.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Ninth Ward meeting will be December 7th at 7 o'clock. It'll be virtual again. Hope to see you all there and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Councilmember Kelly.
No report.
That concludes call of the wards. And our next, Councilmember Nusma is recognized to make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pursuant to 5 Illinois compiled statutes 120/2A, I move that the City Council convene into executive session to discuss agenda items regarding litigation. These agenda items are permitted subjects to be considered in executive session and are enumerated exceptions under the Open Meetings Act as set forth in 5 ILCS 120/2A, Section C11.
Point of information, I do see personnel matters in the list here, so do you want to include that exemption as well?
Just C11 is good. Thank you.
Councilmember Nusma moves the City Council convene into an executive session to discuss the aforementioned items. Councilmember Wynn seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Harris. Councilmember Witten. Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Gravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries. And at 7:53 p.m., the City Council convenes into an executive session to begin immediately in the Council Member Library.